In your pocket right now, you're probably carrying something that seems pretty straightforward, a dollar bill. It promises to be money. But what backs that promise? What gives it value? 50 years ago, in a moment that changed everything about how money works, America made a choice that would transform the dollar from a promise of real wealth into something fundamentally different. This is the story of 1971, the year the dollar changed forever. To understand what happened in 1971, we need to go back to the end of World War II. America emerged from the war as an economic superpower, with something almost no other country had: massive reserves of physical gold. At the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, world leaders made a decision. They would anchor the entire global financial system to gold, with the US dollar as the centerpiece. The deal was simple. 1 ounce of gold would equal 35 US dollars. Other countries could hold dollars instead of gold, knowing they could exchange them for the real thing anytime they wanted. This system worked for a while. The dollar became the world's reserve currency, the money that countries trusted and used in international trade. The US promised to back every dollar with gold sitting in Fort Knox. This gave people confidence. If you held a dollar, you essentially held a claim on American gold. For about 25 years, this arrangement worked. It provided stability. The world knew that the dollar meant something real. But then came the 1960 seconds, and problems started appearing. First, America got expensive. The government spent heavily on the Vietnam War while also funding ambitious domestic programs, highways, education, social services. To pay for it all, they did what governments often do when they don't want to raise taxes. They printed more money. As the government printed more dollars, inflation began creeping up. A dollar didn't buy as much as it used to. But here's where the system started breaking down. Even as the dollar weakened, America still promised it was worth the same amount of gold. Meanwhile, other countries noticed something. America was printing dollars like never before, but their gold reserves were actually shrinking. Countries around the world, especially France and Britain, began cashing in their dollars for gold. It was like a bank run, but on a global scale. By the late 1960 seconds, the math didn't work anymore. America had promised more gold than it actually possessed. There were roughly $3 in circulation for every 1 ounce of gold the US actually had. The system was broken, even if nobody wanted to admit it publicly. Economic advisors warned President Richard Nixon that a crisis was coming. Countries would keep demanding gold. Soon, Fort Knox would be empty, and America would lose its credibility as an economic power. On the 13th of August 1971, President Nixon made a decision. He didn't call it what it actually was. He called it a temporary measure, a Nixon shock, as it came to be known. What he actually did was end the gold standard. Effective immediately, the US would no longer exchange dollars for gold. Foreign governments could no longer cash in their dollars. The link between the dollar and a physical commodity, the thing that had given it real, tangible value, was severed. Nixon told the American people this was necessary to protect the economy. In a sense, he was right. Without this move, the gold reserves would have run dry, and America would have faced a deeper financial crisis. But the choice had massive implications that most people didn't fully grasp at the time. By cutting the dollar loose from gold, America was essentially saying, the dollar's value will now rest on faith. Faith that America is creditworthy. Faith that we'll manage our economy responsibly. That's it. What emerged after 1971 is called a fiat currency system. Fiat means by decree. The government simply declares that this paper has value, and it does, because everyone agrees it does. This created something unprecedented. The dollar was now backed entirely by the government's credit, its ability and willingness to repay its debts. As long as people trusted the US government, they would accept dollars. As long as countries needed to trade oil and settle international accounts, they would demand dollars. But here's the crucial part. Without gold acting as a constraint, the government could print as much money as it wanted. There was no limit, no physical commodity saying, stop. And that changed the nature of money itself. In the gold standard era, if a government spent more than it had, the consequences were immediate and harsh. Gold would flow out, credibility would evaporate, discipline was enforced by reality. Under a fiat system, a government can spend far beyond its means. It can run deficits year after year. The reckoning comes slower, through inflation, currency weakness, or rising interest rates, but it comes less dramatically. The US government quickly realized this. If the constraint of gold was gone, why not spend more? Borrow more? This is where the dollar becomes debt. When the government needs money today, it doesn't simply print it. Instead, it borrows. It issues treasury bonds, essentially IOUs, promising to repay the borrowed money with interest. The Federal Reserve buys some of these bonds. So do banks, pension funds, and foreign governments. Each treasury bond is a piece of debt, and the number of bonds outstanding has grown enormously since 1971. As of now, the US government owes over $33 trillion in debt. Here's the key insight. Every dollar in circulation today is essentially linked to that debt. The money supply is created largely through lending. Banks create money when they make loans. The Federal Reserve creates money when it buys government bonds. The entire monetary system is built on borrowed money. So when you hold a dollar bill, what are you really holding? You're holding a piece of a system built on the government's promise to repay a promise backed not by gold, but by future tax revenue and economic growth. The dollar didn't become debt overnight, but 1971 was the moment the door opened. With the gold standard gone, the constraints on government spending were removed. Debt exploded. The monetary system shifted from being anchored to something real gold to being anchored to belief in future government revenues. It's why the dollar is often called fiat. It has value because we collectively believe it does. That belief is powerful, but it's also fragile. Why does this matter to you? Because it explains a lot about the world we live in. It explains why the government can run massive deficits, why central banks can print trillions of dollars in crisis, why inflation happens, why your savings can lose purchasing power over time. It also explains why the dollar remains the world's reserve currency despite these problems. There's no better alternative. And the dollar's dominance gives America special advantages. It can borrow cheaply, and its currency is always in demand globally. But it also means the entire system rests on confidence. That confidence is typically very strong, but it isn't guaranteed. If the world loses faith in the dollar, if governments and foreign nations lose trust in the US ability to manage its finances responsibly, that changes everything. The year 1971 didn't just change American money, it changed the entire structure of the global economy. It ended one era of money and began another. Understanding that shift, understanding that your dollar isn't backed by gold, but by confidence in the US government and economy, is essential to understanding how money, inflation, and economic policy work today. The dollar changed forever in 1971, and once you understand why, you see the modern economy in a completely different light.